Good afternoon, everyone. I will call the Infrastructure, Transportation, and Safety Subcommittee meeting to order. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? Seeing none, we'll move on to delegations. There are none scheduled, so we'll go to item 4, which is report of the Manager of Environmental Services. And item 4.1 is the annual water summary report to Council. And so, Mr. Bellows, did you want to touch on the report briefly before I open it up for questions?
Through the chair. Yeah, I'll touch on a few things. So as most of you probably remember, this is an annual report that we have to submit to council before the end of March every year. It's part of our ministry requirements for our licensing, which probably sounds very similar to what I spoke to last time we had a subcommittee meeting for the last 2 management reports. But so every spring we do these same 3 presentations. So it's basically a summary of all of our water situations from last year, our sampling, our pumpage, our usage, some of a breakdown of our system, our wells, our distribution system, all that kind of stuff. So just to go over a few highlights, the first part of this summary discusses our licensing and our permit information. So all of those are currently valid with some renewals coming up this year. There's a section that deals with some of our MECP inspection results, which were covered in the management reports from last month. But just one to know was they speaks to boil water advisories, which we had none last year, and adverse sample results, of which we had 1. Then we also have flow data summary, performance summary. So the main item I wanted to note on that may have stuck out was there was an increase of our water usage last year of about 8% compared to the year before. So I just wanted to point out that that data is based solely on our pumpage data that we get from our SCADAs. So there is a bit of reasoning behind that. We had a significant water main break on Griffith Road last year that we couldn't find. I think you may remember that from one of the director's reports from last fall. So that was a very significant one where there was a lot of water loss during that. We had our new dead end flushing program, which was a significant increase in hydrant flushing, running water for frozen services. We had double the water main breaks last year that we had the year before. So that's another significant contributing factor too. It's also what's considered unmetered water usage. So this is water that is being pumped out and recorded that way, but not actually going through a meter in a business or a home. So it's kind of like unaccounted for water. And then we had significant maintenance on the Romeo Control Center last year where we drained the reservoir and we did a bunch of work and we had to therefore fill it back up. And that kind of thing. So we had several things last year that did not occur the year before. So just I figured that number might look a little funny when comparing to the year before, but just want to touch on that. So if there's any questions?
Are there any questions? Go ahead, Councilor Burbeck.
Thank you. Yeah, just a general wondering why some of the flow rates vary signiformly from one month to the next. Like, is there a reason for that? I've just noticed on some of them. Just gonna look here. For instance, in the Chestnut Street, in February, it was like less than half or like a third or a quarter of what it usually is. So it just seems weird.
Sorry, that was Chestnut in February.
So just the number in the last call. Sorry, the monthly average, not the flow rate.
Oh, the monthly average.
Yeah,
okay.
Monthly average.
Yeah, so sometimes the wells have more usage than the other. It just depends on what's happening in the system. So if we are so some of our wells run more than others. So for example, Mornington well doesn't run as frequently as the other ones. So we try to cycle them in to a point where they do run more so that we're turning more water over, we're pulling more water from the ground. And then I have to get a little more specific into exactly what was going on that month, but it could be a result that we had, and actually now that I think of it, we had to install a new valve at Chestnut, and we had to install a new mag meter, which is kind of how we check our flow rates and that sort of thing. So the well I know was offline for about a week at least, and then we had to put it back online, takes another few days. So at a first guess, I'm pretty sure that's why Chestnut, for example, was down, is because we were doing maintenance on it. But typically that's why there is some varying numbers from month to month. It really depends which, like Romeo, for example, had no readings for basically November, I believe, last year. That's because it was offline. So all the other wells would have went up significantly to compensate for it. Yeah.
Right, thanks for that.
Any other questions? I had just one little, I believe it's a typo, but then again, COVID changes time so significantly. I had to check to make sure. November 22nd, 2021 would have been the exceedance on page 9, not 2022, right? Since that hasn't happened yet.
Correct. Yeah.
So flagging a little typo for you, although I'm going to be honest, I was reading the report and I said, okay, I've got my years right? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Burbach, go ahead.
Yeah, when you mentioned COVID, that this is unrelated to the report, but I'm just wondering, are we going to get an update on the COVID monitoring in the wastewater system sometime soon? I'm just really curious about that.
Through the chair, yeah, I can give an update right now, just for that. So coincidentally enough, so here on Public Health, they've been building what's called a dashboard. So it's an online, basically a website that is going to be showing all the data that they're collecting from our wastewater plant and Godrich. So I have seen the demo of it, and my understanding is they're preparing to launch that anytime in the next week or so, if it hasn't even been already. So I'd have to double check that. So that information will be fully available through HPPH's dashboard. But in the meantime, if you're curious, you can go to, if you Google Ontario COVID-19 science table, that's where, so right now all 34 health units are giving all their data to the provincial government, and they're doing essentially the same thing that HPPH is going to be doing. It's got the graphs showing the trends of the wastewater, the COVID densities in the wastewater for the entire province, and then it breaks it down by region, Southwest, Central, GTA, East, all that kind of thing. So that is available. And to be honest, the graphing of what's happening in the province is basically mimicking what's happening in Stratford right now. So any trends that you see, if you look that up tonight, it's very similar to what is happening in Stratford right now. So, and then HPPH should hopefully have their dashboard up shortly. And once it is fully on board, I'll pass that information on to the director to provide that information to council.
And I go to the science table quite often, and I would say the most important, what's happening regionally is the most important for us, because the trends are quite, even though we might be a little ahead or a little behind the regional trend, it really is the most important ones, because it always spills over from one health unit to another. COVID apparently doesn't respect boundaries. So there you go. Okay, any other comments on that? Questions? If not, we do have a staff recommendation that the 2021 water summary report be received for information to keep within the compliance standards set out in Ontario Regulation 170/03. Moved by Councillor Ingram. Any other comments or questions? Nope. All in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Thank you very much. And so moving on now to item number 5, which is report of the fire chief. And item 5.1 is the 2022 Stratford Municipal Airport Study Terms of Reference. Chief, did you want to go through it for us, and then we'll open it up for questions?
Absolutely. So through the chair, this is the 2022 Stratford Municipal Airport Study Terms of Reference. And the objective was to bring back the proposed terms of reference that we put together to bring back to both subcommittee council to go through to make sure we achieve the intent that council had with us going out for the study, to make sure the information that comes back meets everything that council was looking for in order to make a well-informed decision. So the background of this, increasing the airport revenue was included as part of our 2020 service delivery review that was undertaken by the city through Blackline Consulting. And Blackline Consulting presented the city with 3 options in that report. And the first one was considering increasing fees. Second one was consider expanding the taxways to have the ability to add more hangars. And the third one was to consider selling the airport was also an option. After review, staff determined that selling the airport is not the most viable option. While divesting of this asset would bring a one-time payment to the city and decrease some expenses, the airport generates $3.3 million in annual economic activity to the city and the area. If the new owner does not continue to operate the land as an airport, this economic activity would be impacted. Therefore, staff have worked towards implementing other recommendations. So increasing rates of fuel sales and landing fees as one of the points brought forward by Blackline Consulting These were integrated as part of the 2022 budget to improve the revenue stream and offset those that net cost. New advertising opportunities are being designed to draw in new users. And staff applied to the 2021 FedDev Ontario Airport grant program for 1.5 million to try and expand our airport taxiway to fall in line with Blackline Consulting's second recommendation. We recently received feedback and we were unsuccessful in that grant, but staff will continue to pursue other grants that may be available. The development of additional taxiway infrastructure would provide added hangar capacity and provide opportunities for air operators and private aircraft owners to establish operating bases at the airport. During the 2022 budget deliberation, City Council directed staff to retain a consultant for the purpose of undertaking a review of the Stratford Municipal Airport, specifically on whether it can be made financially sustainable, options available to the city if it cannot be made financially sustainable, and any climate change impacts from operations and climate change adaptation and mitigation measures. Staff would like City Council's feedback on the items listed below under the analysis. That's to be listed within a request for proposal for the upcoming Stratford Municipal Airport study to ensure we meet the outcome and expectations of council. Would you, through the chair, would you like me to go through each one? So what we're looking at here is, so we have these points listed below. We have six areas to go into the RFP. We've broken them out as much as we can to this point to where we think we would achieve what City Council is looking for. But if we go through each point, if you think there's something more we could add in, or add a whole new point altogether that you would like to see within it that we haven't listed, or if there's any you wish to omit. I would be happy to go through each point. There's only 6, if that would make it easier, Chair, if you would like that.
I think they're fairly self-explanatory. I'm wondering whether I'll just open it up for any comments or questions or feedback on additions or omissions, if that would work for you.
It would, Chair. I'll just touch on one part because it's very broad. So what we did include in there, we mentioned, quantitative and qualitative, anything has to do with that data and financial impacts. And the Director of Corporate Services is also here. We need to break it down a little further to assist with that. But anything that has any type of financial impact, we're expecting the consultant to bring that portion back to us. So if the consultant is saying it would be more efficient if you added in some IT or software or something else, we're going to expect that breakdown, those potential costs, the long-term, maybe prioritization, suggested implementation planning. So that there is quite a bit of work on that side. What I want to talk about quickly, because I know it's going to come up in the questions very soon and I might be able to answer them. Typical climate change assessments for airports. So there's 3 areas. So you have the airport side where the planes land. You have the terminal, which is infrastructure, vehicles and equipment and energy. And then you have basically the off-terminal side where people get picked up by taxis and limos and family and friends. What it typically isn't done in these airport studies for climate change, they don't take into account the aircraft when you're doing your carbon footprint and stuff like that. Planes aren't electric yet, and they're not using a sustainable fuel yet. So those 2 aspects are kind of taken off to the side, and they look at what you can do, which is in the control of the city since we have our own airport. So we look at whether it's adaptation or mitigation or controls. We look at the typical stuff any city would. So we're looking at protection against weather events. We're looking at the impact to nature, whether it's sound, whether it's environmental, social, whether we're impacting people that live in the area with the airport. There's that side of it. But then we also look at maybe we need to assess the carbon footprint, and that will help us assess greenhouse gas emissions from what we do have. So on the air side, an airport would typically look at, are we using LED lighting on the runways? Do we have any solar capabilities to help run those? The vehicles, are they electric, or are we using typical fuel sources, whether gas, diesel, or hybrid, or propane? The building itself, it would look at climate change impacts on that. Are we using electric heat? Are we high efficiency HVAC systems? What type of windows and whatnot in there? Then you move to the domestic side, I call it. The vehicles that come to pick people up, are they electric? Do we have electric charging stations there for people? Is the limousine electric? Is the limousine typical gas? So they take those type of things into consideration when they look at climate action or type measures for airports. And when I looked at Toronto and I looked at Montreal, London, Hamilton, I looked at all of them and some smaller ones. Those were the typical things being looked at for climate change measures in any study they've done. So now would be a good time to open it up, because the other ones are kind of straightforward.
So I do have then a question around that climate change, because I understand mitigation strategies and reducing your current footprint. I would be very interested in analysis of the region, what airports are in the area, what the driving distances are, where the trips originate. Like one of the analysis they should be able to do is say, if we have, let's say, 1,000 trips a year, where are they coming from? How are they getting here? How many passengers are on those planes and people movement? And would there be, and what are those impacts? So if you have 1,000 planes and they could arrive by by car, that's a big difference. So I would be quite interested in analysis of those trip distances and the number of people through, because that will give us an indication of, one of the things that we haven't considered in climate change is people will have to actually adapt to moving in different ways and flying less, quite frankly, flying less. And so I do think there is room within this to do a bit more of an analysis on that. So while I do agree on the climate change mitigation strategies that we can do, I think we do need to have a lens on the impact of the airport and whether it's sustainable, given the number of trips and the distances. So I would give some feedback on that climate change adaptation and mitigation.
Oh, that's good. I've written that down. Okay.
Councillor Ingram, go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about number 6, and you went into a little bit of the description between the qualitative and quantitative data. I would like to remove the qualitative piece entirely, and I actually don't want this study to be fettered by the perspectives of Invest Stratford or Destination Stratford. I would like those two boards and bodies to be completely separate. And once this study comes back, then they can, present as a delegation or present us with their opinions separately. But I would like this to be a completely separate and independent study, apart from any of those qualitative descriptions or those other interested parties.
And just as a follow-up, I would add, so qualitative data means something, and that is very different than a narrative that you get from Invest Stratford or from the festival. And so when someone says qualitative data, it requires a certain process and protocol and things to follow. That's really, really expensive. In fact, it's more expensive to do well. It's more expensive than quantitative data. So if what you mean by qualitative data here is a narrative analysis on impact to, I don't think we should include that. I agree with Councillor Ingram. And one of the reasons I agree with that is you may get a narrative that points to a need, but then when you look at the percent, like for example, if the theater gets 500,000 visitors a year and 500 arrive by plane, then when you look at the cost and the environmental impact, that is an insignificant contributor to. And just having a narrative of it's nice to have the airport there for those people that do want to come, that narrative isn't supported by either a qualitative analysis or a quantitative. So that's where there's a real danger, and I agree with Councillor Ingram in pulling in some of those other opinions. So,
Thank you.
any other comments or questions on the list of items to be included in the RFP? Deputy Clerk, please go ahead.
Through the chair, given the wording of the staff recommendation, I might suggest that an amendment to those two items be brought forward for the main motion, just to identify those clearly.
Councillor Gaffney, go ahead.
I will make the motion with those changes as suggested.
Councillor Seven.
Could we take the last part about the direction to initiate separately from the other two parts, please?
Sure. Sure. Did you want to make a comment on it? Because it is moved. So did you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, I just want to, comment. I just think it's a lot of money. I don't think, I can see there's some value in it, but I think we have other reports. But it seems like, I just don't think we should spend the money on the consultant. So that's basically my stance there.
So for clarity, would this come back to council for approval of the expenditure, or is that already included in the budget?
So through the chair, so the money was included as part of the budget process, but the RFP would still come back for council to see all the results, especially in this case, because we're not sure if we were conservative or if we're high on this estimation. Although we did reach out to a few across the country that do this kind of work, with the added piece of the climate change addition, which isn't typically done, we feel this may be subcontracted, and we don't know what those extra costs would look like for it to be implemented into the study. So this will definitely come back for council's review, and then we can have some consideration on the costs and whether it'll be awarded or whether it won't be awarded.
Okay, so I'll call the question on. The first is that the report of the fire chief detailing the scope for study on the Stratford Municipal Airport financial sustainability be received. So all in favor of receiving the report. And then the second part would be in city council. And so city council provided additions and omissions to the scope of the proposed study as indicated, and that the direction be given, to initiate the study. All in favor of initiating the study based on the discussed terms of reference. Opposed? That's one opposed. That's carried. Thank you very much. So we'll move on now to, Councillor Ingram, yes.
Sorry, and I just wanted to make a comment about that. We're not technically initiating the study until the RFP is approved. So we're really just issuing that request for proposals, and then once that is approved, then we initiate the study. So maybe the wording of that little last bit of the motion could be revised slightly to say that we're initiating the request for proposals.
Okay. Yeah, that's how I read it, but a little clarity on it is helpful. Thank you. And when it comes back to committee, it'll reflect that. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to item number 6 is report of the events coordinator, and its request for an exemption to noise control bylaw for the Stratford live music and food event. And we have Heather Denny with us today. Welcome, Ms. Denny. And if you want to just go over your report, and then we'll open it up for questions.
To the chair, yes, thank you. The Stratford Live Music and Food event, which is formerly known as Stratford Blues and Rib Fest, is an annual event that has been running in Stratford for about 10 years now. It hasn't run the last 2 years due to COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. The committee is requesting that a noise bylaw exemption for their 3-day annual event from June 17th to 19th on Veterans Drive. The exemption request is for Friday and Saturday night from 11 p.m. and Sunday from 12 to 6. That includes their setup and takedown of the event. The committee has hand-delivered notices to about 101 residents within 120 meters of the Veterans Drive bandshell to seek inputs from residents. 5 comments were received from residents.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Burbach, go ahead.
Thank you. Not sure who might answer this question. I just noted that, so there were 5 comments, 2 were in favor, 3 were concerned about the level of the noise. So I'm wondering, is there any way that we could ask the event organizers to maybe maintain a certain level and not go beyond it? Like, is there a way that we can set a decibel level and say, please don't exceed this particular level? That might sort of be a compromise to help with the people who live close by who find it exceedingly loud. So I'm not sure if there's anybody who could answer. Maybe Taylor, I don't know.
We'll start with Ms. Denny. Go ahead.
Through the chair, so the noise bylaw doesn't speak to a decibel level, but the event organizer has agreed for this year's event to have a committee member checking volume levels over the course of the event to mitigate any noise complaints or problems that may arise through the event. They will be checking decibel levels in various locations to adhere to appropriate level of noise for all around.
Okay, thank you. I guess just we don't have an agreed on appropriate level. I guess that's the issue I see with this.
Well, it depends. Distance, inside, outside, decibel levels. Like you can do sort of a general walkabout and see where it's at, but it would be very difficult to prescribe ahead of time a decibel level at each different location and in each different apartment and things like that. So I think it's a little difficult to do.
Yeah, I just thought there would be a distance thing that might be applicable, but anyway.
Councillor Ingram, go ahead.
Noise is also somewhat weather dependent too. If the wind is quite strong, it will carry it. If it's, you know, a heavy humidity day, it will kind of what am I thinking of? It's like a downward pressure on the noise so that it kind of sticks there. Yeah, yes, it dampens it. So it's a little bit difficult to put that decibel level in because again, weather's unpredictable and that, you know, it's just difficult.
So are there any other comments or questions? We do have a staff recommendation that approval be given to the request from Stratford Live Music and Food for an exemption to the noise control bylaw as amended for June 17th to 19th, 2022. So it would be, and then there's A, B, and C there for the details of it. Is there anyone willing to move that or a different motion? Councillor Gaffney, you'll move the staff recommendation? Okay, any other comments or questions? If not, all in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Thank you very much. So item number 7 is the capital project update, and we do have the director here to give us an overview of the highlights.
Thank you and good afternoon. I guess first and foremost, some of you might notice that we have a new template for how our updates provide. Just like to thank Michelle Cronin, our admin, for doing that. I think it's time it makes it a bit more cleaner, hopefully, for you guys to skim through what's there. In terms of updates, the Sanitary Master Plan update, the tender for this closes April 7th, so that's good news that we might start progressing with an update to that. In terms of reconstruction, I think across the board, we're seeing much higher prices than we normally have. We've had a few bids that have already closed that have exceeded our budget amounts, and we'll be bringing those reports to council to discuss further at that time. Other stuff, Johnny, the manager of environmental services, spoke pretty well to environmental services. I will also mention, just as things starting to warm up, they're moving away from their non-winter to more like seasonal summer type work and repairs. And in terms of the road condition out there, freeze thaw is still occurring out there, so potholes are emerging. We've put out a few notifications regarding the report a problem app on the city website. or that you can call into the Public Works yard to report any problem or issue you do have. We've seen very good traction with that. I believe it was in a 4-day period, we had 70 reports submitted to the city. I think it was 2 weeks ago. So that's being well used. So it's good to hear. I guess the last thing I'll just mention in terms of the climate change internal working group, we've had 4 meetings to date. The primary focus at this point is actually solidifying a job description that we can be used to help recruit someone for this position. I think we'll work much faster once we have that resource in hand. So that is our focus at this time. We still are working on building knowledge. Many of the members are attending webinars, conferences, workshops related to their individual field as we go along. That's my update, and we're happy to answer any questions you have.
Councillor Gaffney, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple questions, if I could. Under reconstruction projects, asphalt resurfacing 2022, the proposed Lauren Ave from Romeo to Home Street. Is there any intersection improvements at Downey as part of this, additional turning lanes and stuff? Or is it just a straightforward take up the old asphalt and put new asphalt down?
To the chair, I believe Downey intersection works being considered, but I'd have to get back to you to confirm that.
Okay.
So I can
Okay.
bring that up this meeting.
Okay, thanks, that's fine. And in under other pedestrian crossing improvements, is there going to be an opportunity for number one, input from council on proposed changes? And number two, is there going to be any public consultation based on recommended changes being made? And I asked the question because as somebody that's driven in Stratford for 45 years, I have a pretty good understanding of how traffic flows. And I certainly would like the opportunity for my input and for others as well.
Yeah. Through the chair there. So there would have been some consultation work, at least I assume so, with the initial transportation master plan. However, we are we identify that these are areas of high interest for the public. So we do plan on doing some public consultation for the draft designs when they do get out as well, just to make sure you know, we gather all insight that we can before we proceed.
Excellent, thank you, Taylor.
Perfect. And I think really the one on church there, it's also like, you know, impact from the school community, from parents, the library is there. So there is a lot of opportunity for some feedback on that perennial problem area. Thank you. Anybody else have anything? Councillor Burbach, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, this is about the climate change working plan. So Energy and Environment Group is interested in being updated regularly. So what I'm going to do, because we have our meeting next week, I'll just take your report to them. But based on last month's meeting, they did have some questions about timing as far as what does long-term mean. I guess they're very interested in the specifics of the plan. And I didn't know if you had answers to that or if that's something that the new staff person would be setting out in the framework.
Yeah, so the chair. So the short term and mid-term is things we can more easily identify with a time frame. The longer term is where it becomes a bit more gray, and it would be more left up to the new position once they're in place to figure out what those reasonable timelines would be. But that being said, these are the goals that we're aiming to address by the end of the year. So any of that future work ideally would start happening at that year end and on when that position's in place. So I expect hopefully in time that the update provided here, the short term and the midterm focus will adjust according to what our priorities are at the time. So be a bit more reflective of where we're going. And then as things come up, we will be presenting from time to time to council with updates for the larger initiatives that we're undertaking.
Great, thank you.
Ingram, go ahead.
Thank you. And just on that, I had a question about the working group members. Outside of the corporate initiatives lead, I think everybody is in a management level position. And I was wondering if there was a reason for that, if there was a reason why it wasn't opened up to staff to volunteer to sit on this working group. I think I know everybody's workloads are quite full, but I had expected a more cross-section of our staff to be on this working group.
So Chair, great question. I'll have to think about a few months back when we first started up this working group, but initially anyways, the focus of this group is on more policy and process. So the people that are contained in this group are more able to make adjustments to their division or their department, right? So if you look, all departments are covered in this group, and so they can go back to their area to make adjustments as required. I see as we go forward that there'll probably be more than just this working group involved. And at that time, we definitely anticipate opening up to unionized staff as well as public and other entities as well. So this is just the starting point, and we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I have a couple items. I was going to ask, and not too long ago, we hired a fleet supervisor, and one of the rationales for it was it would streamline the fleet operations across the corporation, and certainly around sort of some of the maintenance costs and things like that. But then I also noticed that on the consent agenda at the council meeting, there were a lot of new hybrid vehicles being bought and a lot of consideration for greener vehicles. And so we haven't really had an update on the fleet supervisor position and how that's worked out, and even maybe a bit of a report around the sort of greening of the fleet, which occurs, started a couple of years ago and is seems to be moving ahead. So I'm just wondering if at some point in the next few months we could get, if the fleet supervisor could provide us with a little bit of an overview of that position and how it works and what are some of the efficiencies across the corporation that we find with it. I would just be really interested, especially around that, the greening of the fleet piece of it.
Yeah, it's a great idea and opportunity, and the position has definitely been helpful for our division. So I think that it'd be more than reasonable to follow up with that.
And I'm just going to check with the clerk. Do we need a subcommittee motion for that to come back, or is that something that the director can just take back?
To the chair. So if you're looking for specifics, it's best to address them now, or at least provide me some insight. If it's no specifics, I'll just formulate basically a general overview for fleet services provided by the city. So.
And so, Mr. Bantock, do you have any opinions on that, about whether we should make a formal request?
Sorry, through the chair. So just to clarify, it sounds like, is this something that through you to the director that would be provided back in a future capital project update, or would this be a separate item brought back to subcommittee?
So I could do either. So I could have our facility supervisor through the capital update just do his presentation to this committee, if that makes sense. And then we'll just touch the highlights there, and if we need any more information, we can go from there.
Yeah, through the chair, I think then that's fine if that's just taken away. I don't know that we necessarily need any kind of motion put forward for that.
And I'm thinking even into the future, like I really like the capital plan and operational update, but every so often, we could have a little bit of a focus on a different area where it's expanded a little bit. I think we have a lot of new counselors maybe coming in the fall, and these updates are a really good opportunity to highlight different operations and different projects. So I see this as I guess it's a bit more work for the directors, but a bit of an ongoing education for the counselors as well. So that's just an aside. I did have one other item. there was an issue, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of the issue because it was offline and it was operational, but it was about, there's an ongoing drainage issue at one part of the city, and it's drainage, but then part of it was that it impacted a sidewalk, and then it impacted a bus stop, and it's been an issue that's been flagged from a number of different angles by different citizens over time. And one of the challenges I see is how do some of these things get integrated and tracked over time, especially as they may impact, different departments or over the years. And I'm just wondering if the director could speak a little bit to that. Just broad overview. The person that contacted me most recently was really quite curious about, what happens to these concerns and complaints when they come in, and how do they get tracked?
Yeah, so Chair, the great question, and funny enough, I actually had further correspondence about the issue that you're referring to, and it will continue further based on the correspondence I received from historical information. So it really depends what the problem or issue that is brought up, how it is, I guess, reflected in the department is how we address it. So, I mean, typically larger issues, we basically absorb into our capital renewal program and our asset management plan. So they're fairly easy to kind of track through that process. Generally, if they're easily addressed items, we just immediately make work orders for them, and typically environmental services or public works, our hands-on staff go out and remedy the situation in the near future based on availability. And then, and similarly for engineering projects, they can be included into existing contracts. The difficulty that can come out of this, it might be reflective of this incident here that we're talking about beforehand, is that these operations, once they deem it to be complete, they've addressed it to what the initial issue was. Not necessarily is it kept on the flag to be reconsidered at a further date unless a complaint or an issue is raised again, and that introduces the idea showing that the initial issue didn't fully resolve the problem. So that's ongoing. And the other one is like lower priority issues. I mean, issues that are not an imminent hazard or concern typically are kept by the individual department or staff in their own list of things to follow at a future date. And then I guess in terms of an operational perspective, they love their list. So anytime there's a problem, they just add it to their list. So if it's sewer flushing, flood prone areas, icy areas in the wintertime, basically just their list of issues just grows bigger for them to address on a cyclical basis every like 6 to 8 weeks kind of thing, depending on the issue. And then the one thing as we develop our asset management plan that we're looking to improve further is just using that source or resource to keep track of some of these issues, because it does have that capability. It's just not something that's been fully utilized by all departments yet. The environmental services and public works have been pretty good so far at it, but definitely can reach out to other departments as well. So does that answer your initial question?
It does. And I think what it speaks to is a reminder to councillors that if there's something operational going on, to just make sure they contact staff, and also to remind citizens that, staff may address the issue, but if in the future it continues, to be sure to contact them again. That sometimes, you can think you fixed it, but there's something else going on. So I just wanted sort of a little overview on some of these sort of trickier issues to track. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? No? Sorry, 2 screens again. It takes me a second. So the item number 8 is the advisory committee and outside board minutes there for you to read at your leisure. Our next subcommittee meeting is April 27th at 4:30, and a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Burback. All in favor? Thank you very much, everyone. Bye now.